And welcome back, fellow American patriots and Minutemen standing at the ready to fight anew for the issues that matter on this fine Tuesday here at Blaze TV. Your host, Daniel Horowitz, back here to discuss where is the beef. So, we discussed a lot of the existential issues, housing, economy, culture, but everyone's got to eat. And a nation that does not have a cheap, abundant supply of healthy protein is not a nation that's going to survive. And increasingly, governmental policies, these 5-year farm bills, where they have socialized agricultural, the ag industry, the same way they did with healthcare, by the way, has created a monopoly of a lack of abundant, not cheap, and not healthy meat with the monopoly of the four meatpacking companies. How do we decentralize control over food? How do we decentralize the entire process where neighbors and communities can buy food, grow food, homegrown? It's not good. It's not good in the sense that we have a record number of farms going out of business, a record number of ranchers retiring, and it's not being passed down to the new generation. So, is there an opportunity to change things? Could we reset the Great Reset in ag? So, we're going to have coming up Texas Slim, the founder of the Beef Initiative and beef.com, to see what he's doing. I just wanted to get to two stories because I know we're going to talk a lot about food today and ranching and beef, the cattle industry. But just two things in the news that I got to get to. Obviously, this crazy, tragic story of this 50 something tranny guy shooting up his family, killing four and a friend at this hockey game in Rhode Island. Okay. So this follows just last week another tranny, a 17-year-old in Canada, shooting up a school, killing 10 people. And as we've noted throughout the last 5 years, the percentage of these mass murders, public shootings that are committed by trannies is just shockingly high. The I don't think we're emotionally prepared to understand the ticking time bombs that have been created and sewn into society, not just in America but around the world, from this social contagion over the last generation. So what Democrats often do is they'll use the news cycle to generate outrage in order to promote and implement a particular agenda, a legal change, a legislative agenda. We should do the same thing here and harness this win rather than, taking our ball and going home. Oh, okay, we won, to press the advantage. And it's not enough just to say, hey, you can have transgender castration for minors. We should not have this for adults either. We don't allow medical malpractice, willing mutilation for other parts of the body. Why should the balls or the hormone system be any different? So, I mean, the time has come to ban this completely. And yet, even for minors, I mean, it's still not banned in all red states. They still fund it through Medicaid in most states. So, this is something that we need to go full bore on, because clearly it needs to be rooted and ripped out of society. And I know this is controversial among a lot of people, but it shouldn't be. Transgenderism is not in a vacuum. It is the bastard child of gay marriage, where you hallucinate and tell the public that something that's not a marriage is a marriage. Well, it's the same thing. Well, the logical outgrowth of two men getting together and calling that a marriage is, well, looking at a man and calling that a woman. It flows from the same distortion, the same violation of natural law. And again, I mean, we need the states to come back and just refuse to recognize it. We're not even talking about criminalizing anything here. I mean, people are always free to do what you want to do in the privacy of your home, whether it's immoral, whether it's mentally ill. But for the state to indulge it, I mean, the same way I think everyone agrees now, we have legislation requiring state agencies to not uh, ascribe hallucinated names to someone, like if they're a male, to call them by female pronouns. Well, to call two people getting together of the same gender a marriage, it's the same thing. So that's number one. Number two, I gotta say, look, there's nothing new here with this Trump endorsement because he already verbally made the endorsement and I've talked about it. But Trump, out of nowhere, posted on his Truth Social that he's endorsing Dustin Burrows for reelection to his seat and as Speaker of the Texas House. He called him a true warrior, and his strong and effective leadership, incredible people of Texas will have the opportunity to elect five more Republicans to Congress because of the maps that were redrawn. Now, this is a guy that, as you well remember, the Democrats got together with the rhinos and elected him as opposed to the candidate chosen by the GOP conference to be speaker. And he wasted the greatest mandate Republicans ever got in Texas following the 2024 elections and literally did nothing with it. In fact, brought more Democrat legislation to the floor as a quid pro quo to those who got him elected than he did Republican bills. So everyone was certain that there's no way that Dustin Burrows would get away with that. And he and all those who empowered him would get thrown out in the primaries coming up. Well, Trump has now endorsed him. So there you go. So the challenge I have to my colleagues is, how do you continue to complain about the rhinos, the establishment, when Trump is lending his juggernaut support that nobody ever wielded this much influence over Republican primary voters than Trump? And yet he is taking that rather than convincing the voters to throw out the incumbents, he is giving them Teflon protection. And precisely the ones that would otherwise be pretty vulnerable, he is serving as a defeat mechanism for our side. So again, I don't understand how much longer we're going to allow this to go on. But if you want to know why 11 years into the MAGA revolution, why the GOP is as bad as it's ever been, this endorsement of the Texas speaker is exactly the point. But anyway, I do want to get to the main topic today. Make sure you subscribe and like our YouTube page at Horowitz Show because it is being woefully censored every day. The Substack as well, which is not censored, which is great. Substack's like the last free platform. Gets emailed directly to you. I've been doing it about once or twice a week so far. A little bit of a digest of stories, a lot of stories I haven't gotten a chance to get to. Haven't had time to comment on. I know a lot of people are like, Daniel, you haven't gotten to this. It's like, it's not that it's not important. It's just that there's too many things that are important. So I'm trying to get through my stack of stories that I haven't gotten to in the Substack. So you could subscribe there. Daniel Horowitz, Liberating Truths is the name of that Substack. So, folks, centralization versus decentralization. That is really the fundamental fight of our time on every issue. Because the people that want you to own nothing, to be nothing, denude you of your humanity, uh, an ultra processed fake life, fake world, fake currency, fake food, fake healthcare. They want things to be centralized because if it's centralized, government can work seamlessly to prop up private companies that aren't really private and then could work with them to box out any alternative choice, any better product, cheaper product, or availability. And this is true of everything, but it is so vital when it comes to food and particularly healthy protein like beef, because after all, everyone's got to eat. And if everyone's got to eat and the government centralizes control and flow of beef in the country and the world, well, then you're up the creek without an oar. You kind of got a problem there. And this is why, when you look at the statistics with independent ranchers, independent farmers going out of business, filing for bankruptcy, not handing it over to their next generation because of land appreciation, pricing, uh, other natural disasters, and government regulation, regulatory capture, that's a big problem. We're now out at an inflection moment where there is this growing movement of the incumbent older American cattle ranchers that recognize this as a problem, have recognized it, and they're now working to create a parallel movement where, yes, you could have more freedom to sell to your neighbors, make food available, beef available in your communities without asking government's permission. As our next guest likes to say, communities that control their food control their future. Who is this man? He goes by Texas Slim. So that's what we're going to call him here. Texas Slim, a seventh generation rancher from Canyon, Texas, founder of the Beef Initiative that we've talked a lot about this past year. And now he purchased beef.com. We're going to talk about that. You could follow him at Modern T Man on X. And of course, he is with us in person today at the Blaze. Hey, Texas Slim, I've been meaning to get a hold of you for so long. Really excited for today's interview.
Hey, Daniel, thank you. A lot of grace for, you uncovering and kind of, being able to speak to what's going on in the now, within our food systems, our money systems, our government. So, it's been a long road, but, it's just to correct, I'm a seventh generational Texan that was born into basically commodity, right? And, I was born in the top of Texas, which is the Texas Panhandle. We call it Camacharia, they call it the Cap Rock, they call it a lot of things, but one thing that is, always stood true, the majority of beef in the state of Texas, goes through the corridor in which I was born into. And that means something today. And it's meant different things throughout the generations in which, I was, lived my life. So it's kind of a new beginning. There's a lot of uncovering to do, of course, but you've done a great job. I know that you had Cole Bolton on recently. He is also a founder of the Beef Initiative. We have other ranchers, Jason Rick, he's up there in Colorado. I'm here in Canyon, Texas with my other partner. It's Justin Trammell, and it's the Trammell family. And what they did is, they saw what I was doing and I saw what they were doing. And we began again, many years ago, but we're in an inflection point, and that's what we're moving forward with. So good morning.
So before we get to the inflection point and how we steer that to a positive outcome, how we get decentralization out of this initiative, just give a couple minutes summation of what challenges are facing the status quo, why the status quo is unsustainable, why we're seeing so many bankruptcies, people selling off their land, children not wanting to continue in the ranching business, even if they've had it in their family for generations. What are those 3 to 5 factors that are driving the status quo into an unsustainable model?
Well, it's kind of hard to understand, food anymore. We've got generations of kids and, adults now that really have never known what pure, honest, natural, clean food is. So, if you look at how we've gone from, where I was born in the late 60s, and what happened in 1971 was the monetary reset. A lot of people didn't understand. We went off the gold standard. So let's just start there today. That's run a course. It's been a cycle. And since 1971, there was an old boy named Mr. Engler. He created cactus feeders right here in the Texas Panhandle. And that really was a movement that happened within cattle operations, stewardship, land, money, of course, because we went into debt obligations. So let's just start there. Our debt obligations in agriculture took a major shift in the 70s. And in the 80s, it kind of caught up to us as far as if you weren't going to work in a debt-laden, basically obligation, with the incentives that they throw at agriculture, you weren't going to be around. My grandfather, he never owed another man another dime. And through this transition, he got rid of everything at the end of his life because he didn't think that there was any way that he could steward the land in which he had stewarded since, the early 1900s, within the family. So let's look at that. This nation doesn't understand that, those peaches that, they get for their kids, well, they're probably raised in Georgia, and then they were harvested, and then they're shipped off to, some place like Belize, believe it or not. Then they go for packaging over in Asia, and then they land back up on the lunch table of our children, and that's something that requires a lot of energy. It requires a lot of, mid-layer, basically integrated industrial operations that weren't there in the past. All the middlemen that we have to answer to now in agriculture have been implemented and basically penetrated into our homes, for over, about 50, 60 years now. So America doesn't know what food is, for one. And it's not our fault. It's because we've listened and we've stewarded our families, our land based on one thing, USDA. And so let's look at USDA. Let's see how they operate. Let's see all the obligations that we have to answer to, and let's unfold like an onion and see where we are. And that takes you down to the water table. We have a fight going on, a global fight. And it's a digital war. It's a information war. It's a mindset war. But what you're not really realizing, it's an energy war, and our money's about to change just like it did in 1971.
So yeah, money makes the world go round. And obviously, what we've found in healthcare and agriculture is that government comes in and steers capital allocations. And then that basically defines the process for that industry where the money and innovation goes. So as it relates to meat, you guys have been sounding the alarm for a while that the regulatory structure of the USDA has created a monopoly of meat packers that have this global operation that you kind of described with the peaches, but it's definitely true with the beef processing that made it impossible or nearly impossible for people to purchase in their towns, in their counties and communities from their ranchers next door. What exactly is it that government's doing that created this misallocation towards the monopoly and away from the family rancher?
Well, I was talking about peaches earlier. Just let's talk about protein. Let's talk about, grain. And, let's talk about the source of the seed of all of it. Here where I sit, it's cattle country. It's the desert-eyed plains. And the state of Texas has 254 counties. At one time, we had 254 micro processing centers. Okay, nobody knows what that means really because you don't see them. They're very nondescript. And it's about distribution and it's about ownership. Once you've stewarded livestock, a lot of people don't know what, livestock, what that means in this country. We have children in this nation that don't know what a cow is and what a steak and where it comes from. Okay. Where does that burger come from? Well, it comes through a processing center. Okay. And you brought up the multinationals. We have 4 multinationals. I don't like to, put targets on anybody because there's a lot of people, damn good people that work in these industries. But what you have at the very high is ownership. Who owns these things? And the ownership of these corporations are not owned by American families anymore, but a lot of them have names that came from an American family. Look at Tyson. Okay, Tyson is a brand, but it's also a multinational corporation that has many different integrated industrial corporations embedded, and one of those is processing. And we can speak to cows because I'm about the cow, because if you don't have cow, you don't have basically protection of the cow, you don't have a food system. And this is what we're going to be able to show, those layers and what that means within our processing right now. I talk about Texas, 254 counties, 254 processing centers. Those things, those processing centers, well, they're built and they're stewarded by the local families and communities. Okay. In a local processing center, the one that we work out right now is Panhandle Meats Processing between Amarillo and Canyon, Texas. Let's all start there. That's the center of the universe. And if you have that knowledge of how do the cows get to the processing center, what happens, and where does it go? Okay, there's regulations, EPA, you got all kinds of things you have to answer to with the USDA guidelines. State of Texas, we can act like our own USDA certification at the processing center. That means that we can raise our beef, we can take other, ranchers, producers into our processing center. We know the cow, where it came from. We don't have to know much more than ownership. And then after that, they have their animal process. They can go do with it whatever they want. They have a certification. And so we're going to teach the world what it means to have a processing center, because in Hereford, Texas, just right down the road here from Canyon, Texas, is, the big multinationals. And there's feed yards, there's feeding systems, there's damn good people that live in Hereford, Texas, but they're working for corporations that now pretty much envelope, all of our distribution and the processing of livestock into an edible product that is safe. And so if 85% of that protein is now being controlled at the processing center, that means they're controlling the distribution. And so that's what we're up against. It's about the distribution and where does it go after the product has been made into a beautiful, edible, source of food that used to was our health. And now it's the source of our demise in so many ways without how they have engineered a consumption model, for a nation. We had the food pyramid, what a lie. Let's start there. Back in the 50s, we had the big fat lie. It was an attack on animal fat and cholesterol that started a whole, generational shift of what food is. And within that, Mr. RFK just said that the number one, in my mind, he said that animal fat is the number one nutrient, product, whatever you want to call it, that you need to get into your consumption model. Well, that's at the processing center. So many years ago, me and all these people that I've named said, we've had enough of the bullshit. We're going to take it back to where we once, had ownership of the full vertically integrated operation, what it means to start with a cow and where it ends up, on your fork. And now within the beef initiative, we have many operations across the United States that has a model design that's vertically integrated. We control everything from the very first part of that cow, the genetics of the cow, and all the way to the fork. That creates a lot of data. That creates a lot of opportunity for revenue. And, we get to unfold now. I acquired beef.com for a certain reason, to go bold economic efficiencies into the future. And, once that gets basically clarified of who truly owns beef.com, we're going to begin again. And we're going to present to the world a model design that is vertically integrated into food security. That's, it's based on a gold standard model of agriculture that a lot of different ranchers, operators, farmers, they can all be a part of this now, because there's a debt obligation that's about to be called out in this nation in agriculture. And I think a lot of people don't know what that's really meaning.
So when you talk about the gold standard
Yes,
of
sir.
ranching from the cow to the fork. So as it stands now, contrast it to what we're dealing with now, where you might raise the cows, you feel it's healthy, it's sustainable, but then it's processed through the multinationals. What sort of concerns or health concerns do you have under the current paradigm of this meatpacking monopoly?
Well, who controls the distribution? But if you look at these operations that have scaled so big, we don't need to have processing centers that harvest 5 to 7,500 cattle a day. And then, that brings a lot of heat, doesn't it? It brings a lot of energy. It brings a lot of maneuvering. Well, that brings a lot of disease too. And, within the way that we have to show that we take care and steward our land and our cows, we have a lot of basically data points that we have to meet in banking and in feeding, right? In stewardship. And within that, if you have a lot of debt obligation that you're paying into these multinationals, and that's the only way that you're financing your next herd, well, you're basically, you're doing it in a way that's been very, very synthetic. Okay. What we do, I say pure, clean, honest, and natural. Okay. I never met a cow that didn't love grass. Okay. Most of my ranchers, it's an ego thing. We don't like to be called grass farmers, but that's the number one thing that we are. We harvest grass with the land tools. Those land tools are the cow. And they do fascinating things that this world doesn't know. But, the multinationals know every bit of it because they stole our model back whenever we were feeding our children in a 30-mile radius and this nation was healthy. It's an inversion to get back to what we used to do. We have to look at those regulations, those policies, the financing. And if you look at the multinationals, they have millions and millions of dollars that they throw at lobbying. And, we have Chevron deference as well that we're looking at within regulatory capture of the debt obligations that we're going to have to face into the future. There's a control grid coming to agriculture that very few people understand.
could you talk about any of those regulations? If you had to change one law that would help decentralize the entire process of bringing the meat from the cow itself to the fork, what would that regulatory or legal change be?
Well, I'll give you an example, and let's just focus. Needs to understand EPA, right? And what are they here for? Well, whenever we first started building out the Trammell family here in the Texas Panhandle, that's they used to be a very strong integral part of the way we used to run the auction house here in Amarillo, Texas. And at one time, Amarillo, Texas, in the 1930s, it was the number one marketing hub of auction houses across the world. And so if you look at that, you look at the EPA and what they make us match, that the multinationals, let's look at water, wastewater. Okay, whenever you run one of these big operations out there in Hereford, Texas, that goes through a ton of water. Okay, let's look at what they have to answer to because of the wastewater that they therefore create. Okay, 7,500 cattle a day is a lot of energy. It's a lot of waste. Within a smaller processing center, we might only harvest 1, 2, 5 cows a week, or we might, harvest 30 a week. But that's up for us to determine. Our wastewater is ours. It's on the same land. We have ways that we can protect, maintain that wastewater that has nothing to do with the United States. It has to do with how we basically steward that water from the Ogallala aquifer or wherever we're getting that water. We should be more in control of having the rights of storing that water. Whenever we went through opening up Panhandle Processing Center, we had a lot of inspections, and we can therefore unfold what we have to go through in inspections. And they involve the EPA. They use these diseases. We have the screwworm. I know that we're really watching that closely, and that's a form of exposure and deception that we can kind of unfold because we have the solutions locally. And if you would listen to us on wastewater in a smaller, not scaled out operation, we have so many different regulations that we can run with that allows us to feed our community, and we don't really compete with the multinationals, and that's what nobody's understanding right now.
So obviously, the idea here is to decentralize the processing, part of this, but then you have the antecedent to all of this, which is the actual numbers of cows, because you can't have beef without a cow. So we now have a record low beef herd, or a beef herd that's lower than we've seen in several generations.
Over
And
70 years.
70
Yes.
years, that portends a very long-term problem of scarcity, high prices. I know the president is, in response to that, wants to import and quadruple the imports of beef from Argentina. You guys are saying that is the wrong strategy, because that again is just being turned around, processed by the multinationals rather than systemically rebuilding the herd. What do you
Yeah.
feel is wrong about the Trump administration's policy, and how could it be steered into a more productive policy that maybe systemically rebuilds the herd?
You bet. When I started the beef initiative, I started it. It was one man that saw something, and I changed my life because of what I saw, because it scared the shit out of me. And I knew that it would take a whole full, decade long cattle cycle to kind of build out a solution that people could start believing in. And right now it's been about 6.5 years. I've been on the road for 6.5 years now. And within what I've seen, if you look about what's going on with the current administration, um, it's very surface level. And what's happening here, and I'm only going to speak truths because it's not a fight, it's exposure, and it's a way to be a servant leader in the United States right now and across this world is to
Yep.
live in some truth. And be authentic about it. And I'm Texas Slim because that's what my damn mom named me. So, we're going to bring some truth of what's going on. The administration right now is confused. And, JBS, it's one of the multinational corporations now controlling a lot of our domestic beef. And it's a clown show if you really unfold it and look how much control they truly have and how much money they've siphoned out of our pocketbooks. and commodity and centralized cattle ranching and, operations and stewardship, we have something called the beef checkoff. We have to give basically, started out $1 per cow at the processing center auction house. That was supposed to be marketing for the independent sovereign rancher. What is independent? What is sovereign? What is ranching right now? I think that Trump is basically being advised by good people, but I think he's basically missing the core, basically fundamental, issue that's going to invert our stewardship of our land and our cattle back home. JBS has been fined up to this point. You can't keep track of it. During, COVID, they basically, manipulated the retail and wholesale markets. And, we were saying, hey, Department of Justice, you need to be on this. Okay. They were basically price manipulated $500 million of profit out of the retail sector, and they will only find, I think, about $56 million. They'll take that deal every day of the week. And that's what they've been doing for a long time now. So let's unfold what we can basically, since this current administration is saying that he's going to investigate JBS, let's isolate JBS and say, what are your results? Show us the evidence of what you're looking at. And let's really unfold it in a way that gives the independent rancher a voice, a digital voice, especially, because that's one of the reasons I started this. Independent ranchers, cowboys, every bit of it. We've never had a digital voice. And so within this new administration, I talk about the control grid. Well, it's going to come, and I'm not liking what I'm seeing here. It looks very dangerous on how he's basically approaching the multinationals and who he's put in charge to run some programs that, a lot of ranchers are in America right now, the MAHA team. Well, hell, back in 2020, I said, this is a great American health initiative being led by the great American rancher. And that was way before anybody was talking about anything that we are now showing the world that's happening in real time.
So as it relates to the imports, wouldn't it make more sense rather than importing finished beef to go to the meat processors? How about if we would import healthy genetic cows, heifers from Argentina or elsewhere? Would you support importing, cows at the beginning level of the chain? And could you speak to what you're doing to try to do something similar to that with El Salvador?
You bet. My number one thing, and this is what people get very confused because of, how I operate, but if you got a cow that's born in Randall County in Canyon, Texas, it needs to stay in Canyon, Texas. Its whole life. That's true stewardship. It's not possible, but we try to make it to where at least the cow stays in the panhandle. Maybe it'll stay in Texas. And so within, shipping beef and exporting, we're now a net importer of beef. That is laughable. That is laughable. And within that operation, that's how you can see that we basically created a model that scaled across this world that's now being leveraged against us. And how do we keep that cow at home, right? And if you look about all the arguments right now, being a net importer of beef, where are we getting that beef? Well, it's many different countries, and they really don't have to tell us. It says product of the USA on that label whenever that mom picks it up at the grocery store, because she's trying to do the right thing. She's saying, I'm doing the right thing here, but that beef's not from, the United States of America. And if it is, we don't know which ranch, which county, which state it came from, because it's prime choice or whatever. And so if you look at that, let's just keep the cow at home. Let's not make it complicated. Let's keep it simple. And it's going to be complicated for a lot of people because they didn't go out there and steward a new way of ranching, which is based on the old way we used to do things. And so let's get back to the source of the seed. And if you can keep that cow locally, Argentina used to steward some damn fine beef in this world. Well, they're suffering the same thing that we are, and you look at the genetics of cows, we're really prominent in Angus, black Angus. That's not the only cow that's good for beef. That's one thing that this nation has lost too, because we've been obligated to basically steward into the Angus genetics very deep. But, that's been many decades. Well, there's a lot of cows out there that create a lot of good beef. And a lot of people eat good beef that they don't know that it's Angus or not. So shipping beef from Argentina, be it the cow, be it the intellectual property, the genetics, the semen, whatever it is, the USDA controls that. So we really don't even have a voice. So let's just keep it simple. If you're not going to allow us to do things, we're going to do things where we keep things within our borders. Okay, our intentions are to make sure our children have the right food. You know, the 4-6s used to feed that whole independent school district in that county. And you know, out there where it is, and you know, the 4-6 is only an hour and 45 minutes away from me. And so that's what I grew up. And then you have the Matador, you have the XIT, you have the JA, you got all these wonderful historical ranches that did used to feed the independent school districts. You know, who stopped the 4-6s? Well, it was the government. And within that, you know, the government basically came in, stepped in, and they said no. But you know what was happening in the independent school districts? The children were improving their grades, attendance was up, the behavior started improving because they were getting animal fat to the children's brains. And so once again, it's so simple, it's complicated, and we're going to have to unfold all these regulatory captures that have hit us. Within my journeys, you know, I've been around the world 3 times in the last, 5 years. And nobody could really understand what I was doing. I was building out nodes of understanding, nodes of intellectual property. I was shaking people's hands, but I basically built out a operation that landed me in the country of El Salvador. And by doing that, you know, El Salvador is a country that's been trapped. They've been trapped in war of the cartels, CIA operations. A lot of people don't know, but well, we do because we do our research. But you know, I went down there and I did some research based on everything that we're talking about today. That country, the country of El Salvador, you know, that word means savior. And so what we're doing in the country of El Salvador is I told Oscar, he's the administrator there, the minister of agriculture. I said, we're going to take you back to where it's like it's 1878 Texas. And I'm going to educate your country what that means. Because you have a president that shows some courage here. You know, Mr. Bukele had to make a lot of decisions over the last 5 years, and he made decisions based on the health of his nation. Yes.
So you're working on importing healthy cattle from El Salvador?
No, sir. No, sir.
How is that designed to help the American rancher?
What we do is we show the world that El Salvador is a country that's been in war. Their infrastructure is way behind right now, and they don't have anything. They have to ship a lot of food in, just like we're doing in the United States. So once again, 5 years ago, the Trammels and, Cole Bolton, he was part of building out a USDA processing center, and his engineering, made it very successful. And so we have a model that El Salvador trusts, the Beef Initiative, but especially me, because of what I've educated them into. We're going to start again, and we're going to basically breed a genetic cattle program that fits El Salvador, their money, their microbiome of their soil, of their water table, of what they see in the future, what they want to do right now at the beginning, coming out of a war with the president that has courage. Well, there's a new money system coming into El Salvador. We're going to begin again. And then within El Salvador, Texas, the Texas Panhandle, well, I'm doing the same thing in Texas Panhandle that I do in El Salvador. And I've got ranches and partners all from Montana to the bottom of Texas, all the way out to, freaking Maine, all the way down to, Baja, California. We're covered all of our corners here, folks.
There's
and now we're going to
there's 2 more threats I want to get to just because we're running out of time here. The cartels. A lot of people think of the border and the cartel issue as a problem of smuggling across illegal aliens and smuggling, obviously, drugs. But in fact, I've learned that there is a lot of illegal cattle, livestock moving across the border. Could you describe the extent of this threat and why it's so concerning health-wise?
You bet. Well, let's look at the migration. Let's look at the big lie that just happened during the last, whenever. But the last 4 or 5 years, millions of people have come through our southern borders. And so if you look at basically the pathway, the journey that the humans have to take to get to the United States, livestock follows the same corridor. It's not on the same footpath, but as far as the journey they take, there's a corridor there that has been corrupted, all the way down to Brazil. And so let's look at what that corridor is and how does this livestock make it through these borders? Every border checkpoint, that's what we do. We look at USDA, we look at what we have to do in the state of Texas and the United States, and we see all the corruption that's been unfolded because of this migration. There's a migration that's gone on in livestock that kind of mirrors and rhymes with the migration that just happened with humans. And so we have, Brianna Sagdahl is one of the best research analysts in the United States when it comes to, agriculture. She's been writing policy. Justin Trammell here, he's part of Farm and Ranch Freedom Alliance, and he's on the board of directors there because of his knowledge of processing. Well, we're going to bring that same knowledge of transportation, distribution. How does it get here? How do we have Brazilian cattle now basically being more populous as far as consumption than Texas beef in the state of Texas? It's like I say, it's hard. It's hard to understand, but if you can get down to the base layer, the independent people out there, do your own research. See, go to beefnews.org, see what we're doing here. Look at me every day because I've got a terabyte of content that I've never shown to the world. And with me acquiring beef.com, I'm going to show the world what true ownership is, what distribution is, and what beef is. We've lost the definition of what true food is. And, the food intelligence that I bring, I was born into commodity, but, I had to steward my adult life in technology. I didn't have a dime when I graduated high school, but I had all the opportunities in the world. But, we had so many family issues, and that was during Farm Aid. So everybody take a look at Farm Aid because that's what we're about to go through in the United States, but it's going to be on steroids in ways that, people need to get back home. They need to get their consumption model that matches basically the good, bad, and ugly of what's going on right now. And if you can mirror your actions and your desires and your mindset on what we're doing in the beef initiative and what we're about to do, I've got the best minds in the United States cattle industry right now that are my partners, and they're going to help steward what beef.com should be.
So one thing that is going to go up against your revolution, we talked about the external threat coming from the border with the foreign cows pushed through by the cartels. But then you have domestic. You have this obsessive attack on land use. We had the wind and solar farms, and now we have the data centers in a time of a drought that are, for these chatbots. You're in the Texas Panhandle, right near you, and then certainly in Abilene is the really epicenter of this Stargate project where they want to build dozens of hyperscale data centers that use endless amounts of energy and a ton of water in volumes that we really haven't seen from any one industry before. In addition, that has the effect of raising the prices of land, which makes it hard for people to hold on to ranches. Could you speak as someone who's in that region to the threat of the data centers and what we can do about that?
Thank you for bringing that out. And people are now just starting to talk about
Yep.
it. Well, I'm a independent research analyst in technology, and I've worked for some fascinating companies. But let's look at data. And nobody understands that data is the number one commodity in the world right now. And there's going to be a data war, and it's driven by AI. So within these data centers that have been proposed, and that's all they are, they're proposed, they have some funding, but they require a lot of energy, they require a lot of liquidity, and they're going to require a lot of water. The Texas Panhandle sits on top of the Ogallala Aquifer. And over my lifetime, I've seen the aquifer drain, dry up because of commodity grain pumping. And so we have 20,000 ply lakes here in the Texas Panhandle, and that's a recharge zone for the Ogallala. And if we can really look at water usage and what AI and the data centers are going to require, it don't match up. I can do an independent AI search on Google. That just took a liter and a half of water for me to use an AI-free bot. And so, knowing that, water is going to be, there's going to be a water war. There already is in the state of
Yep.
Texas. You look down in the Nueces Valley, there's all kinds of stuff going on. But we have Fermi up here, which is Pantex. It's right next to Pantex. And so what's going on in Abilene is this the same thing that's going on in the Texas Panhandle. And to your point, they're proposing these data centers in certain places across the United States that I like Elon's philosophy. We're going to put AI data centers up in space. And that's going to take a little time. So let's just kind of stop and let's get some understanding what's going
The
on.
cost
Because
benefit is a lot better there, and I don't
yes,
know how you do it, but in theory, I'm all for that. The
yes,
point is the notion that you're gonna have cattle ranchers that have to pay sales tax on every commodity input, every purchase, property tax. I mean, I was just dealing in West Virginia. They want to exempt the data center companies from all property sales and income taxes. So it's like if you have that same land stewarded on behalf of cows and ranching, and it's subject to taxation, but then if you use it for data centers it's not. Well, that's where you're going to see the shifting of resources.
yes.
And to me, it shocks me how this is not a bigger issue in the Texas legislature. Understanding, particularly in a time of a drought, you've been in a multi-year drought in that part of
Yes.
the country, and it just shocks me how this is not a bigger issue.
Well, it is. And that's where we have, well, nobody knows what to look at. We live in a digital world, and the digital capture of what the hell's going on right now is getting very confusing to a lot of people. But you ask, like, why are not more people talking about it? It's, well, it's, let's follow the money and let's see who's controlling the media. And that's what I'm going to do here locally. I'm going to set up shop here, universally and globally. The world headquarters of the definition of beef will now be in the top of Texas and the Texas Panhandle. And we're going to bring new media. We're going to bring new energy, new understanding, new clarity. We're fully decentralized in the way that we can be right now in agriculture. We have proof of work. We've sold millions of dollars worth of beef now with a new different standard of protocol of understanding. I've been in Bitcoin, and that just terrifies everybody. Bitcoin is nothing but an open source software solution for people to educate themselves on right now. We're going to go through this technology transformation in AI. I've been through those transformations. And if you know how to follow the money and who's involved right now, I think Palantir is one of the scariest things that nobody understands. And, in cattle ranching, we've been so socialized within our money ever since the 30s that people don't even know what independence is. But let's
No, no, I
talk
mean,
about
this
that.
is the thing. We look to the next 5-year farm bill
Yeah.
in terms
Yes.
of the guideline for what agricultural policy should be. So I definitely love what you're doing. Before I let you go, could you just again reiterate what is so important about country of origin labeling and why you think that will induce a big change in the industry?
The number one, it's energy. It's stewardship. It's what is ownership. Let's give these ranchers a voice that do it right. This is not, cattle ranching is a lifestyle. It's a heritage lifestyle. And that heritage lifestyle has been copycatted many different ways. People look at me kind of, cross-eyed sometimes because of the way I behave. Well, I'm a commodity peasant. And, I've had to operate in a system that never invited me in because I didn't have the credit or I didn't have the money. But what I have now is I have the best minds in the world. We're about to going to steward something forward that everybody can be a part of. And, with beef.com, we're having a lot of people that we're going to bring in. I told everybody this is a great American health initiative being led by the great American rancher. I don't have to ask for permission. And therefore, with this new business model, we're going to show that there don't need to be any borders, but those borders need to be for our cows, and our cows need to stay home. We need to find ways that people can have regional or very local access to animal proteins in a way that this country doesn't understand. But we're the one that wrote the book on it, on how to do it in the first place. And so, this country has an opportunity to pour themselves into a mindset first and foremost, to quit validating all these damn deceptions of a broken money system that's about to get called out. This is confusing to a lot of people. I had to be very stealthy for 6 years. Well, at the top of a bank tower here in Amarillo, Texas, Therefore, a new voice will come. And also out of El Salvador, a new country will rise out of all of these deceptions. And people will have to have some patience and persistence. And in El Salvador, Mr. President Bukele says, paso y paso. That's one step at a time.
Yep.
And we have the solutions, folks, and we don't have to argue. Well,
No.
it's not a debate. There's a
So
lot of
check.
ways to raise a cow.
So people need to check out beef.com. Where else could people keep abreast to the latest news in the cattle ranching business?
Well, you can see what I do. I have a small platform that I steward. It has different technology on it. It's Texas Slims Cuts. And, I use different technology with that. It looks the same on the surface, but within that platform, we're going to start showing a lot of different opportunities and invitations to collaborate. So TexasSlimsCuts.com, beefnews.org, in my mind, is the most premier media outlet now for agriculture, starting with the protection and ownership of the
Yeah.
cow and what's going on.
Beefnews.org, very quality
Yes,
writing there. Texas
yes.
Slim, we just scraped the surface here, but thanks so much for your optimism, for your initiative, for your innovation. I really hope God will bless this endeavor because nothing short of human food and sustenance is dependent upon it. God bless you and thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much.
Alrighty, folks. So that was Texas Slim. Quite the unique character, quite the experience there. Let me know your questions, comments, concerns for him as well. I just want to reiterate before signing off here. Just want to repeat what I closed with yesterday. We have, speaking of Texas, our Texas state activist Rudy Anger's wife was diagnosed with glioblastoma. If you could please check out Rudy Anger's page on Give, Send, Go. Put it up right here on our video component. Help Shay access life saving therapies. That's his wife. And, there's just so many people in this boat. It's like, yeah, I mean, health, food. A lot of this is a rediscovery. And like he's saying, some of it is governmental action items that we need to change. Some of it is a mindset among our own people because in part we're not really going to be able to change a lot of governmental policies and the question is could we change our own behavior our own mindset and use the sandboxes that we have the latitude legally and practically that we have to make our own decisions on things like food and health and certainly gonna looking forward to doing more shows like this tomorrow we're going to continue on the health trend with a show on marijuana, the lies about marijuana and cannabis and this obsessive cartel that, oh, you just legalize it and everything will be okay. Crime will go away, no problems. And instead, any place that has done that has been a living hell. I don't care if you're a hardcore libertarian, you got to wake up and smell the skunk like disgusting marijuana. So we'll talk about that tomorrow. Till then, Micah 68, God bless y'all. And thank you for listening.